The point of the matter is, due to circumstances outside of my control, our planned segment on what appears to be some inconsistency, ideological inconsistency from Matt Taibbi, who was once one of the most venerated and respected, including by me, advocates for free speech in the United States, was cut short. And so I am excited to have the two of you on from one of my all-time favorite streaming shows, Due Dissidents, to continue the conversation about what exactly is going on with Matt Taibbi. Welcome back to Bad Faith Podcast, Keaton and Russell.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bri.
Okay, let me hand over the floor. You guys did, again, one of the best segments I have seen. I think the best segment I have seen about what is going on over with Matt Taibbi at his Substack and on Twitter. What's your take?
As I said in both pieces, I have a lot of affection for Matt. Matt has always been very nice to us. He came on our show when we were tiny. Whenever I've met him, just even watching him, he is very generous to talk to anybody, people who have like 16 followers and a blog. He'll spend time with them in settings where, everybody wants to get a piece of him. He'll talk to people who are just, there to see him at length about whatever they want to talk about. So from my dealings with him and from my observation of him in those kinds of settings, he's a very nice man, which is part of what makes this so painful. And it's a big part of why I didn't say anything about it for as long as I did. I was kind of hoping it would work itself out, because here and there, I could see him wrestling with this. He dropped a piece about Khalil. And I think he got some pushback from some of the audience he has now.
Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia grad student
Yes.
who was disappeared off the street and kept in detention for about, 3 months?
It's like 3 months.
104 days.
3
yeah.
months.
Yeah.
And missed the birth of his first child. Yeah. Okay, so he did
Yes.
do a piece on Mahmoud Khalil.
He did. And when the ICE raid started, he did a couple of things, and then he wrote, it was very revealing. It was kind of a plaintive piece. I think it might have even been titled, "Can't I Have Friends?" Because he got all kinds of pushback because he has a different audience now. And I think he got a lot of shit for some of that. And why did his work take this turn? I believe it's not a natural evolution. You could see some people where you see they naturally went that way. And I think very often the liberal class creates its own worst enemies in that way. Certainly they went after Taibbi in ways that were really unfair. They tried to Me Too him. Of course, the Wasserman and Plaskett double team on him is kind of legendary. The sending the IRS to his house, and similarly as with Joe Rogan, who wanted to support Bernie, and then Bernie wouldn't embrace that endorsement because he had some pressure because of Rogan's views on certain things. They give people every incentive to take the money. They do everything possible to make you say, well, fuck it. Why not? These guys want to embrace me. They want to support me. They want to platform me, and they're not going to try to make specious claims about my sexual past in St. Petersburg or whatever. Why am I going to continue to go to bat for this faction? In Rogan's case, you can kind of see a natural evolution from where he was to where he is now. Matt, it's a very weird break. I don't know that he believes what he's saying. It's
What do you
just
mean? About what?
I mean, he's straight up lying about not knowing enough about Israel to write about it, as I demonstrated, and actually Zaid Jalani did the research, he found one of Matt's old pieces written with the Exile magazine. And he understood it very well 23 years ago. What do you know less about it now? He hit on every point that anyone would hit on today, right down to citing an Israeli operative talking about how good this propaganda is for Israel and connecting it to how many Palestinians got killed, possibly as a result of this. The piece was about, if you're old enough, you might remember, I don't know if you would remember directly, Brianna, there was a video, and the piece was called 30 Seconds or something like that, because the video clip was 30 seconds. And it was a video of Arabs celebrating, supposedly Arabs celebrating 9/11. Now, it came out later that the clip itself was taken out of context. But Taibbi took it at face value and nonetheless made the case CNN just got a lot of Palestinians killed by playing up this clip that way. And he connected it to how Israelis love that kind of propaganda. You understood it with that depth and that nuance. He talks about how shallow the way that the media treats the Arab world is and how there's this colonizing power there that makes them hate us. He understood all that 23 years ago. And so when you say, I don't know enough, that's just not honest. So you have to ask, why? What happened? It seems to me that he is compromised in some way. You know, they sent the IRS to his house. You don't know what he's been threatened with. And again, I don't know if it's connected to that.
I mean, so I am struggling with the idea of connecting it to the liberal pile-on against Taibbi, which was not rooted in the Israel criticism or his lack of Israel criticism or his previous Israel criticism, but in his coverage of the Twitter files that was embarrassing to the liberal establishment to the extent that it shined light on their misinformation around certain stories like the Hunter Biden laptop story and the extent to which the Biden administration was applying pressure to social media companies to censor information that ran counter to the mainstream's thoughts on several issues, including Russiagate and COVID, right? So why do I make that distinction? I make the distinction because one of my frustrations has been that Taibbi's ire toward liberals may be justified. What I don't understand is his ire toward the left. And as someone who extensively defended Taibbi, including in the context of those Jasmine Crockett congressional hearings and the intimidation at his house and the IRS and all of those kinds of things, why there is a conflation between a good faith criticism from the left that appreciated his support, his reporting, even when it was in some ways, quote unquote, advantageous to conservative interest or to a conservative worldview that they are being uniquely victimized by censorship culture. Defending him because the value of the reporting is there regardless of if it sort of supports my political ideology. And yet still treating the people who would have done that, like myself, as bad faith actors. And then cut to now, where we're in a world where he's being criticized for declining to talk about the censorship story of the era, which is censorship of Israel critical voices, the Mahmoud Khalil of it all, the Columbia crackdown protests of it all, the numerous efforts to pass laws that would criminalize boycott, divestment, and sanction, etc. The fact of Bari Weiss, a longtime pro-censorship advocate when it comes to pro-Palestine or Israel critical speech, being promoted from her Substack to basically having editorial control over CBS News, and I'm choosing to characterize that as merit and the cream rising to the top, and anybody who would be critical of it as lazy and jealous, quote, lazy and jealous, ignoring the fact that his allies, both in the anti-censorship space and in many other media contexts who have been incredibly brave, like Aaron Mate and Glenn Greenwald, have also criticized Bari Weiss. Is he saying that they're stupid and lazy, or jealous and lazy, or jealous and whatever the phrase was?
Yeah.
You know, why is there this on this for one, like selective ignoring of who's actually making similar criticisms, but then just making this claim that everyone on the left who has never been out to get him in the way that the Crockett's of the world has, might be raising legitimate criticisms about why he has this enormous gaping hole in his own reporting. And just to put one last fine point on it, and then I'll shut up for a long time. He is actively right now reporting on Racket as we speak. The errors in reporting around the Charlie Kirk assassination. Writing about how the New York Times had to make a correction on a story that had characterized Charlie Kirk as making an anti-Semitic statement when in fact he had not. No comment, though, on the Wall Street Journal, perhaps even more egregiously, framing the markings on the bullet as reflecting a transgender ideology and having to walk that back. I have no problem with him reporting on the New York Times story correction. But at a certain point, the evidence mounts that you are selectively blind to any criticism, any retraction, any speech, any censorship issue that negatively reflects on the right. And this was the early criticism of Matt Taibbi around the Twitter files. Why is he advancing a right-wing ideology? And I defended him in that instance. And he says, well, all I'm doing, the research that I'm doing, it just happens to be that the censorship is against the right. But at a certain point, when we could all see with our eyes wide open that there's aggressive and overwhelming censorship happening that is cutting in a leftward direction, and you are selectively declining to cover it, at what point does that wholly, or at least in part, validate your early critics? Okay, I'm done for now.
All right, so I just want to say, before we get into all of that, and kind of pick up to where your question leaves us when it came to the Twitter files and the exposing of the, censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story and, all of that, we defended Taibbi staunchly against accusations of bias. And because I know people are going to flood the comments section with this if we don't mention it, and, at the risk of making this a tad awkward, we defended him against you when you went after him for that. And
wait a minute, stop. I did not go after him for that.
All right.
So wait, I just want to be so clear. We'll put clips in of it. I did, I don't know, untold number of segments on Rising defending him and his right to to report on the Twitter files. Regardless of the timing, it would be an act of intimidation. It's actually kind of odd that if there was a coordination that they wouldn't know that Matt Taibbi wouldn't be home because he's testifying at this very public hearing. But regardless, it's not a good look to be arguing that Matt Taibbi is overreacting or somehow inaccurate when he describes the weaponization of the intelligence agencies to influence social media and to have political influence more broadly, and then to have this kind of a presumed audit appear literally at his doorstep. Now, could it be a coincidence? Of course, anything's possible. Could it be the case that there are legitimate inquiries to be made here? Of course, it's possible. But this is the issue. When there are all of these instances lined up against each other, when you're able to, weave together a narrative that's really compelling, when you point to the raid at Mar-a-Lago, when you point to the way Matt Taibbi is being treated here, it starts to become a presumption of guilt. And it's incumbent on the government to prove that it's actually running its agencies with the stated interest of the agencies in mind, instead of trying to target various citizens who are going against the administration. My question to him when he came on this show was whether or not he had done any searches on the catalog that had been made available to him of left-wing bias. Like, did you, look for any? I was curious about it, right? As someone who has been shadow banned also, who thinks shadow banning and the censorship is a big deal, did you look for any bias against the left campaigns, like the Bernie Sanders campaign. We know from the Podesta email leaks that there had been similar coordination with liberal media sources to do attacks on Bernie Sanders in the 2016 campaign. It seemed like an obvious thing to look for especially if you shared a kind of Bernie-ish ideology and was supportive of that candidate in previous election cycles. He said no, he hadn't. He hadn't even thought to maybe search for the word Bernie within the Twitter files. And I subsequently, because of my background as a lawyer, asked him if he had considered asking questions about how the archive that he received had been defined. So in other words, how do you know that you haven't been selectively given information that excludes bias against other groups? When you're a lawyer and you get a document review, a document trove, you ask what search terms were applied to the totality of documents available so you can get a sense of whether or not those terms might have excluded relevant documents. I simply asked if there had been any kind of interrogation into that. He said no. And then I followed up asking, well, then can one really say that the bias really militates in one direction of another if you don't have confidence about what the entire trove is like? I subsequently talked to Glenn Greenwald and asked him these same questions. He similarly is a lawyer.
I remember that,
on the show. And he acknowledged that he would also have the same concerns I had and might not even choose to report on the Twitter files because of how serious those concerns were. But I did not at any time say it wasn't valuable to report on the Twitter files, that the reporting that came out of it, especially I think Li Fang did some very good reporting, didn't have intrinsic journalistic value. And I didn't even go so far as Glenn Greenwald to say that I would not have reported it or welcomed access to it if I were in Taibbi's position. Just that I think that he should have maybe framed things differently in the course of his reporting, given that he did not have full information about what he was even being given to evaluate. That's all.
Okay, sure. But as I recall, his defense was that he was searching for these agencies and what these particular agencies sought out to censor or not censor. So in other words, he wasn't interested in doing a broad search to keep score. Well, if I found one instance of censorship against the right, I now have to go and try and seek out one instance of censorship against the left. I'm searching for these agencies and just seeing what's on their radar. Yeah. At the time, I bought that line of reasoning. I'm still somewhat sympathetic to that line of reasoning now, if I'm being honest. But also, if I could just do one more thing. The other thing that I remember is when he said that he didn't want to criticize Elon because he knew he was dealing with an emotionally fragile man-child who eventually was going to ask him to leave Substack for Twitter, and so I just wanted to keep him happy for as long as I could until he asked that question. At which point, I would have to choose Substack over Twitter. At which point, he's going to have a fit. And I'm going to lose access to all these files. So I'm just saying, I sympathize with both of those points at the time that dust up between you and him happened. And I can't come on your show and talk about him without revealing that, lest we get roasted. Let you catch a very unexpected and severe ratio without knowing why.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I just had to reveal. Yeah, I just want to make that clear. I just don't want to hide anything.
Sure.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
And I'm sure Brianna's aware of that. So I led those segments. So, yeah, I mean, that was pretty much what Taibbi said about it. He also made the point, which I backed up in our segments about it. Well, it would have been impossible for them to screen that amount of material. That was essentially the essence of what he said, that he was searching for the agencies. And if that had been in there, it would have been in there because in the time that they had to scrub it, it would have been impossible for them to scrub it. Now, in hindsight, I think he was bamboozled. I don't think he was lying. I think he honestly believed that. Looking back now, I don't buy. I did at the time. And as Keaton points out, quite vehemently so. But now, I mean, the past is always getting redefined by the present. You look at how things have played out since then. And I think particularly if you look at some of what they were able to do with Doge on a dime, the technology advanced in between, but it wasn't that long a gap in between. I think the assumption now that they could not have gone through those files scrub out
Yeah, you guys,
certain things is not
this is what's
as much
kind
of a slam dunk as it seemed at the time.
this is kind of what's frustrating from my perspective, because I'm sitting here telling not you, but like the collective you, that I don't have expertise in many areas of the world, but I surely spent 7 years of my life basically doing discovery practice as a corporate litigator. And I'm sitting here telling you that the reason that legal bills are so high is that all junior associates do is process thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents by hand, reviewing them in exactly this kind of context. And I'm telling you that there are there's protocol and there's case law and there's precedent up the wazoo for how to do this process efficiently and accurately. And that this is not reinventing the wheel, that it's possible, and that people who are not the richest man in the world manage to do this by hand. Not even talking about the extent that you can just put filters in and search criteria. There's software, scads and scads of software developed to do these searches, to mark up and to code documents in certain kinds of ways so you can cross-search them and refile them and blah, 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 blah. And despite me saying this with actual expertise, it takes what? A full self-immolation of Matt Taibbi before there's a willingness to engage in the critique that I'm making. And even when Glenn Greenwald, another attorney who also happens to have experience with processing an archive, who is even more esteemed than Matt Taibbi in the same free speech space, validates my concerns and my perspective, somehow still my voice, my arguments don't seem to count for very much. And I gotta say, that aspect of this is a little bit frustrating. Why was it so easy to characterize my very mild critique that I made to Taibbi's face in a very gentle way, in a way that was gently encouraging him maybe just to broaden his search in the interests of good journalism, in the context of me having defended him at length on the Hill? Why was it so easy to dismiss me as basically jealous and hateful the way that he is now dismissing his critics more broadly?
I mean, since we're gonna have a kumbaya moment here, in all honesty, and as Keaton points out, we definitely took Taibbi's side on that, and I would say that Keaton always kind of took a back seat. I particularly roasted you quite a bit until the douchebag dialogues, as I call them. Yeah. That really changed my perspective, because watching you up on the stage there with the Riddler and the Penguin, as we call them, I was forced to admit that, and as I think if you watch the show even in passing, I'm very skeptical of the way identity politics is often weaponized and used to miss the point. But part of my critique of that is it does distract from moments where it might be valid, because it's the boy who cried wolf, like people don't want to hear it. Do you get a special vitriol as a Black woman in the space? I didn't think so before. I do now. Over time, that's become pretty apparent to me. I think you stick your neck out on certain things like that. I mean, that was at a moment when Matt was still very much in good standing. Like, this contradiction on the Israel coverage had not played out the way it has now. So much had not been revealed. Can somebody else take those kinds of positions without getting quite as savaged as you do? Yeah, I think so. I think if we're being honest, that is an element of it. We're in a space that is full of people who take all kinds of takes, very provocative takes, crazy takes, off the wall. You definitely get it. Look at Michael Tracy right now. Yeah, man. I mean, some people are mad at him, not like some of the shit that I've seen come at you. There's definitely a level that's beyond. Um,
I appreciate you saying that, Russell. And to be clear, I didn't say it. I feel like I'm not allowed to say it. I try to avoid saying it because, to your point, I agree. I agree that there's a sort of, I don't know that I would say a boy who cried wolf, but certainly a choice to weaponize identity by
yep.
generally liberal institutional actors that has nothing to do with the substantive interest of the
Yep.
identity groups that they purport to care
Exactly.
about, to advance what are fundamentally neoliberal interests. And that was, frankly, the beginning of my career as a journalist, was covering exactly that beat. Why? Because it was important to me to distinguish between real racism and real bigotry and real concerns of that nature, and the ways that it was being weaponized by these liberals in a way that was actively desensitizing people to caring about the real stuff.
Right. Right.
And so what you just said was very validating to me, and it resonates with me, which is part of why it's so frustrating to me when I am ever characterized as someone who is doing the sort of like using the quote unquote race card or anything like that. But I don't want this to be about me. What I'm really interested in is you guys did a really, sorry, Keaton, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was going to say, I didn't mean to throw an M. Night Shyamalan twist into this whole interview by bringing that up. I just wanted to clear the air a little bit, just for full disclosure to both you and the audience, because I knew that would be a huge thing if we didn't. But to your question that you asked, if it's okay that I answer, because that's what I really wanted to kind of focus on. Look, I mean, when the IRS comes to your house, that's got to be a scary thing.
Right.
I've gotten letters from the IRS. They know how the phones work. They know how the mail works. When they actually show up at your doorstep, that's a scary thing. So I think there's valid speculation about all of that. One thing I've always noticed about Matt, and one of the things I've always liked about him, and one of the things that I really clicked, like when we had him on the show, I thought those were some of our best episodes. Like, he's a great hang. He's very funny. He's very loose. He's very nonchalant. He's very easy to talk to in conversation. He's always seemed to be a pretty conflict-averse guy. And I know from, that I won't disclose any details of this, but I know from, hearing about interactions between him and other people that he tends to be, I won't say shy, but someone who, likes the waters calm, really. Whereas, a lot of people in this space are the opposite. A lot of us are, junkyard dogs who can't wait to, go in and just verbally just rip someone to shreds. Verbally, I must say, in this era nowadays, obviously. But I think, part of what I do believe causes him to not want to touch the Israel-Palestine issue is the emotional severity of the issue. Like, there are a lot of very intense feelings around this. There's a lot of white-hot anger around this, as there should be. And I think that probably impacts him as well, just from a temperamental standpoint. I would have to introduce that as a possibility.
And this is a guy who is sort of characterized or known for being a gumshoe reporter who's willing to dive headfirst into these difficult issues. You're telling me, and this is a difficult argument.
Well, this is something I should add something to this. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave this out. This was important to connect those two things.
Okay.
The emotions are so white hot around Israel-Palestine, where if you do have the government on your ass and you start speaking out about this, that could be a combination that you might not want to pursue, right? Like those two things combined might deter you from speaking up about this, since there have been, we all know, there have been widely publicized and widely touted suggestions that we censor and crack down on anti-Israel speech. Project Esther, the Heritage Foundation plot to just basically dismantle as many constitutional rights and protections of Israel critics as they possibly can. Now, if you're a guy who owes a bunch of money, and like I said, I don't want to say things that I don't know about, but we do know they paid him a visit. If you're someone who is vulnerable in that way, maybe you don't want to say too much about this. I think that's a possibility.
What about? Go ahead.
I pretty much dismiss out of hand that this is a natural evolution. I don't buy it. It's just too much of a jump. This is not a Paul Wolfowitz. This is not a Trotskyite to neocon kind of a natural progression. It just doesn't make any sense. It's too much of a break from his entire body of work. I believe that for certain people, and when you get to a certain level of the game, very often you might get put in a position where it's like you have to pick which mafia family you're going to submit to, or they're going to fuck you. Like, hey, he doesn't actually have to be guilty of anything. Being told, yeah, we're going to tie you up in court with this IRS thing for 5 years if you don't shut up about this and that subject. It just doesn't make any sense for the Taibbi who wrote I Can't Breathe, who wrote Griftopia, who wrote Hate Inc., to just decide to completely destroy his credibility by refusing to wade into the most contentious issue of the day that touches on so many areas of his specialty, particularly civil liberties and freedom of speech. And that's why that Bari Weiss thing blew up so many people's silence, including ours. Like, I had been waiting it out, and he had decided, all right, man, I'm just going to keep writing about the Twitter files. I'm just going to keep writing about things that I can Russiagate. I'm just going to keep litigating things from 4 and 5 years ago that I can plausibly write about without talking about Israel. But that's exactly why you can't take a powder on that. As soon as he wrote about something that was relevant to the current era, it was just so obvious what gymnastics he had to do to miss the point, to make the Bari Weiss story a story about elite journalists. I mean, sure, that's there, but that is the least interesting and relevant part of that story. I mean, if anything, that merits a glancing reference in a piece about the fact that through the Ellisons, CBS, this once the most storied of news networks, this legendary news network, is being bought by the largest contributor to the IDF. And then to go on your show and say very flippantly, as we in our second piece about this showed, yeah, I don't know, David Ellison. They say something about Larry Ellison. He gives money to Israel. I don't know if that justifies Glenn saying it's state media. Well, the key word there is you don't know, because you just said you didn't look into it. So why did you write the piece? That's what's so frustrating and sad about it.
I mean, by his own logic, he's offered various excuses over the last months and years. He said that Israel-Palestine is too complicated. Well, as that piece rightly points out, he didn't used to think it was too complicated, and he has had a sufficient understanding of it. I was looking for the tweet just now. I couldn't find it because Elon ruined Twitter and it's no longer searchable. But he had a tweet that basically said, there's no point in arguing with people about Israel-Palestine because no one can be persuaded, so why would I report on it?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Why would I report on it? Because no one can be persuaded. Is that why you reported on the Twitter files? Because you thought that all these liberals were going to be persuaded that Russiagate wasn't real, or that censorship was a real problem, or whatever? Because you thought they were persuadable?
First of all, it's not even true that nobody can be persuaded. I mean, arguably, I've seen more movement on this issue than any other issue in my lifetime because of the genocide. You've seen Tucker Carlson come around on this. You've seen Candace Owens come around on this. Charlie Kirk seemed to be in the very early stages of coming around on this. That's all I'll say for now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been plenty of movement on this issue. And Matt, who had a pro-Palestine critique 22 years ago or whatever it was, having attracted a largely conservative audience, he is in arguably the best position of anybody in this space to persuade more people, right? Because he's got this conservative audience here who loves his work. And now if he starts saying things that, you don't have to go as far as Candace Owens. Even what Tucker is talking about, you don't have to cover the on the ground reality. You could cover it from a censorship point of view, like why there's no Racket News article on Project Esther, which is a terrifying document outlining the plans to censor and undermine pro-Palestine voices. There's just no good explanation for that. There isn't. And I don't feel like, okay, well, if you don't feel like covering it, then I don't really feel like taking you all that seriously anymore.
Yeah, and I hear you guys saying that people feel threatened and overwhelmed. I'm sorry, Matt Taibbi's a millionaire. I am not. I make less money now than I made when I was a 26-year-old graduate from law school. And I was willing to give up my job to talk about Israel. Why are you in this space if you're not willing to make a case, especially if your whole career is about talking about the singular issue, not singularly, but like substantively talking about censorship, to suddenly say that this is the issue, that now we have to be afraid because Matt Taibbi's being targeted in this way. The whole world is being targeted. Matt Taibbi, Mohammed Khalil is being prevented from seeing the birth of his first child. People are being rounded up in the streets. There's a bill, Marco Rubio wants to strip the passports away from American citizens if you criticize Israel. Is Matt Taibbi going to write about that? And I'm supposed to feel sorry for Matt Taibbi? People can't keep roofs over their heads or keep their families intact, and I'm supposed to say, well, oh, he's being uniquely threatened. He is not in any way being uniquely threatened. I'm getting Google alerts because my tweets are being clipped in the Daily Wire and put on these hit lists of people who quote unquote danced on Charlie Kirk's grave for the crime of, this was a good one. I retweeted the Trump clip where he is asked about Charlie Kirk and instead starts talking about his redesign plans for his ballroom.
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks. They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty. It'll be an absolutely magnificent structure. And I just see all the trucks. We just started. So it'll get done very nicely, and it'll be one of the best anywhere in the world, actually. Thank you so much. Your message.
And said, wow, I guess this is how you honor your friends. And they quoted me as saying, Brianna Gray, former Bernie press secretary, sarcastically says, this is how you honor your friends about Charlie Kirk, omitting that I was quote tweeting a Trump disrespect in the first place. But I mean, like, we're all being targeted, right?
Sure.
Besides which, take Israel out of it. This isn't about Israel. There are 1,000,001 censorship stories that had nothing to do with Israel. And that's why I brought up the thing about the Wall Street Journal story, getting the trans ideology thing on the bullet wrong. Matt could easily say, hey, the New York Times is getting it wrong in these ways about Charlie Kirk's ideology, and the Wall Street Journal is also getting it wrong. That's a huge story that they let the world believe for like 2 solid days, while the President of the United States, multiple members of his administration said that we have to have an all-out war on trans people because it was trans ideology. Elon Musk, the richest person in the world, are all beating this drum, fueled by this Wall Street Journal reporting that was wrong. And Matt Taibbi thinks that's not as big a story as the New York Times characterizing Charlie Kirk as an anti-Semite and then having to walk it back a little bit.
Well, Bri, I don't know if you knew this, but Massachusetts is turning their state flag woke. So, Matt has been writing about the important issues in the wake of all this. The Charlie Kirk thing is a nightmare, again, just like Bari Weiss. If you put yourself in a box where you can't point out the elephant in the room, or you can only tiptoe around it, or you can only frame it in a way that's going to be acceptable to a certain audience, how do you write about it? Yeah, I mean, you make a good point. Like, we all take risks sticking our necks out in this space. We don't know what he's been threatened with. I don't have a family. I mean, somebody asked me, well, what will you do when they threaten your family? I say, retire, probably. Like, I can't see going out there. It is so torturous to read his articles. And that's why I say it's not natural, because you can see him working to try to be relevant without talking about everything that's relevant to the historical moment. And when you're not inspired to do what you're doing, you just do it by the numbers. So even in his prose style, it's very lazy, it's very repetitive, it's very playing the greatest hits, shot into space, and it's the same phrases over and over again because he's mailing it in. Because how could he not be mailing it in when, for whatever reason, we can only speculate. I based on just my observation, this is not a natural ideological transformation. I think he found a particular thing that he could harp on without feeling like he's lying per se. He doesn't like the liberal woke stuff. So he's confining himself to that, where he feels like he could report on the flag of Massachusetts and kind of bang it out and okay. But it's obviously, it's completely irrelevant to the moment. You got this Charlie Kirk story where, as you point out, they used this to push through Congress, new hate crime legislation. And this is stuff you'd think you know where you really saw it, and we covered it in the second video. You had all these people who wanted to jump on this British comedian who got rousted at the airport. What's his name? Greg Linehan, I think his name is. I could be wrong. And everybody jumped on it, because they're starving for these woke stories now because there's not as much of it to go around. A few days later, 842 people are arrested for protesting in England. Are they going to cover that?
Nope.
Like, I'm not saying a comedian that should happen. Of course, I'm against that. What's the more relevant story? They treated that like the story of the week, and I haven't seen one of those people who jumped on the Linehan story cover the 842 protesters, including a blind man in a wheelchair who were arrested in England. Nor will they report on all of the British journalists like Sarah Wilkinson being rousted.
Or the people, there's a hit list of God knows how many thousands of Americans already being compiled where conservatives are actively screaming to get them fired from their jobs and are effectively doing so. They're firing, and by the way, not that I believe you should be fired for dancing on Charlie Kirk's grave, but these people are not even doing that. These are folks who said Charlie Kirk did not deserve to get killed, but he was a vile person. He was a racist. Like, he created the conditions that might have contributed to his own death because of his stance on gun rights. That sort of thing. The man does not deserve to be killed gets you put on a hit list that costs you your career. And I hope it doesn't cost anybody their lives, given the vitriol that is being stirred up by the very people who claim to hate cancel culture. Matt Taibbi is today tweeting about the dangers of a heckler's veto, saying nobody is asking you to celebrate his life, Charlie Kirk's obviously, but in an era where deplatforming the heckler's veto and rising belief that certain kinds of speech should be outlawed, his performances were advertisements for counter speech over censorship. Matt Taibbi says Charlie Kirk's performances were advertisements for counter speech over censorship. Okay. So Charlie Kirk is to say all the vile, horrible things in the world, and that's free speech. That's fine. But right now, today, the issue is that people who are criticizing Charlie Kirk and the way he lived his life are being fired from their jobs. And someone points this out to him and says, from what I can tell, all the firings have been over people advocating his assassination, even promoting further assassinations. Untrue. That's untrue, by the way. And that person says it's very different than demanding people be fired for not wanting a vaccine. So this is the rationale people are doing, that it's different because Charlie Kirk is dead. It's different. It's somehow different from the people who were for 5 years now celebrating the death of George Floyd, including Charlie Kirk. And Matt Taibbi, sorry, I just lost the tweet. He's spending so much time arguing about Woody Allen that I have to scroll back farther than I anticipated to to find this tweet again.
I saw some of that.
But here it is. He says Taibbi says Madison was very clear that speech needed to be free, but not free of consequences. meaning social consequences of more speech. If you can embarrass someone, embarrass a person for saying terrible things, that's in bounds. Now, a law mandating firing for criticism of Kirk would be different. Would be different. They're actively promoting a Charlie Kirk law to do exactly that. There is a So two things about that. One, the freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom of consequences argument was an argument that a lot of liberals used during the quote unquote woke era, and that conservatives absolutely rejected. Absolutely rejected. There may have been some firings on the margins, but most of the so-called right-wing cancellations were people who felt pressure from their academic institutions because they were out of step with the broadly held cultural values of those academic institutions and chose to retire or step down. Bari Weiss chose to leave the New York Times. Jordan Peterson chose to leave the University of Toronto. These were not firings. And conservatives at the time said, well, they were constructively pushed out, so it's the same thing. Now we have Matt Taibbi saying, well, if someone was, bullied and harassed into silence because they were put on a hit list, that's not the same thing as a law. And also, he's choosing to ignore the laws that are being promulgated as we speak and the laws that have already been promulgated, which specifically punish pro-Palestine speech and which are being designed to punish anybody who would criticize how Charlie Kirk lived his life.
Well, I know, and I'm sure you do too. I know academics who were on Charlie Kirk's hit list, who were threatened, who were doxxed as a result of that. Are you allowed to talk about that? This is what's so tragic about all this. I can't think of a writer who we need more in this historical moment than the writer who wrote this book. We need that writer, because if there's any writer who could really expose all the contradictory impulses of this moment, all of the hypocrisies that you're seeing on all sides. We're going to be covering, obviously, the Charlie Kirk thing later. And to make the point that this is not, just conservatives or MAGA-aligned people who do this, I'm going to show Cenk talking about how he wants to make a gun exception for trans people. He wants to arm trans people. So, this kind of deranged...
what does that mean?
He was saying he believes in gun control except for trans people because they need the guns to protect themselves. He was saying there should be a trans exception in gun control. So does Cenk believe that? I don't think so. I think he's a circus clown, just like Alex Jones. Like a lot of these guys are just barking seals trying to get clicks and performing for the camera. This is when he thought his money was going to be in that cause. And then he saw the way the cultural winds were shifting. He decided, well, I'll just be a little left of the Daily Wire, and that's going to be a bigger niche. And then he changed his tune. But yeah, no, he was just deranged on, like he is on every topic. He decides is where the money is. He just cranks it up to 11.
Because he's also really been on this scolding the left for not being sufficiently graceful about Charlie Kirk's death. Again, I'm not going to buy into the framing that it's people celebrating his death. It's people refusing to celebrate his life. And Charlie Kirk. Cenk Uygur has been doing a lot of these it's not quite the Ezra Klein he was doing process the right way tweets, but it's let me just pull one up. Let me just pull it up. Because I feel like he just an hour ago said, a lot of people on the left didn't like Charlie Kirk for what they thought was hate speech. Okay, but what's more hateful than murdering someone? If you were that opposed to him for that reason, shouldn't he even be more outraged at what happened to him, which was pure hate? Really trying to encourage people to be outraged. You don't get to dictate someone's emotional response to Charlie Kirk's murder. And I especially think it's tone deaf in the context of a genocide to expect people to reserve their emotional energy for Charlie Kirk's death so disproportionately to what's the new estimate? 600,000 dead in Gaza. Not to mention that people are experiencing all kinds of personal financial immiseration. personal losses every single day of the week that quite obviously take precedence over mourning or being outraged over the death of a hateful bigot. Now, if you want to be outraged over a kind of a sense of lack of public safety or gun violence more broadly, I think those are all legitimate. But why one of the leading voices on the left is spending so much time and energy trying to gin up outrage in particular over the loss of life of Charlie Kirk as a human being is a little confusing to me.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Keaton. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I do think that, obviously there's a range of reactions here. But, I have seen a lot of videos on Twitter and on TikTok of people, I think, very stupidly, given the stakes of the moment, come out and, yes, rejoice at the death of Charlie Kirk. I not only do I find that to be morally abhorrent, I do think it demonstrates an extreme sort of dissonance between their analysis of the political moment we're in and the emotional sort of reaction to this event. If you're worried about Palantir building a surveillance database on all of us, you have to be pretty fucking stupid and clownish and imprudent to record yourself rejoicing about this very high profile, politically motivated assassination. I do have to caution people against all of that, and I think there is a lack of seriousness about this moment.
Cenk isn't cautioning people.
Cenk
isn't saying, "Hey guys, be careful because they're out to get you." He's saying he sincerely believes that people should be aggrieved, that people should be sad, that people should be.
Look,
I'm just going to say I don't think that cat sincerely believes anything.
Okay.
No, because I disagree. I think that he is a. Well, first of all, I think that
who cares about him? But if I could just say
you guys
something.
brought him up.
Okay, but who cares?
That was me. That was him. Go ahead, Keaton.
If I am definitely aggrieved, or not aggrieved, I definitely do grieve this event, not because of a personal attachment to Charlie Kirk or any kind of reverence for Charlie Kirk. We used to dunk on Charlie Kirk all the time. We've made our opinion of him pretty clear. But I do think there is a tendency right now to underestimate the seriousness of this event and the ratcheting up of the stakes of this event. You have, in response to this event, warnings being issued very vaguely, but we all know what the extreme ends of those warnings are and what they mean. And I think it does have very, very, very serious and scary implications for this space, for the internet more broadly. I think, we are going to cover later. One of his friends, one of the suspect's friends, talked about this is what happens when you spend too much time online. I think that's true. I think broadly speaking, the internet is poisoning this country. It is poisoning all of us. And I think there are times when the emotional cesspool of social media bubbles over and it starts impacting real life. And that's when I think real horrible things start to happen. And so I do think that there is something to look at here that transcends the sort of tit for tat. Well, remember when you called for censorship when this happened, and now the right calls for censorship when this happened. I think it is a good time for people to take a minute and think about how you actually want to live, how we actually want to live, because this is an extremely cataclysmic event that can very, very quickly usher in some extremely dark and dangerous times. And I wish that everybody felt that. I've barely tweeted since that event. I've barely wanted to talk much since that event. What I have wanted to do since that event is reflect on the whole nature of this whole space, the whole nature of this panopticon called X, where we go at each other all the time as if nobody behind these handles are real people. And I think that is really As I don't want to start repeating myself, but I think the effects of that are extremely toxic and extremely dangerous.
It sounds to me, Keaton, like you're making an argument about the way that kind of traumatic events, whether it's something like 9/11 or October 7th or Charlie Kirk being killed, can be used to expand the surveillance state, go to war, to execute a plan that just needed a pretext, the shock doctrine of it all. And I would agree with that. But I think that to me feels like a very different thing and has very little to do with random individuals on the internet sort of rebelliously refusing to be, to treat Charlie's death in a hallowed way.
Sure, but
And
this is
whether
what
or
I
not
think is a little different.
But wait a minute. I just want to be clear. Whether or not I personally feel like it's tasteful for my own personal ethics, what I do know is that I am not. I do think it's also wrong to be tone policing people like that. One, because I think there's a legitimate expression of anger against someone who has actively rooted for similar harms to befall other communities. And two, because I don't think that there's any relationship between Donald Trump's administration wanting to use anything it can as a pretext to expand surveillance powers and to promulgate laws that punish people for speech that it characterizes as hateful, and what some random Twitter user is going to do. Like, I think if we've learned nothing else, being conciliatory, trying to play by their rules, it doesn't affect what the right is going to do. Fundamentally, and people have done this analysis, every single elected Democrat came out expressing condolences for Charlie Kirk. When the right is trying to come up with examples of folks who are being inappropriate, quote unquote, about Charlie Kirk's death, it's random anonymous people from the internet. Contrast that to the president of the United States and Charlie Kirk himself, by the way, making jokes about Nancy Pelosi's husband getting attacked and his skull cracked open by a hammer. We have sitting
sure, but if I could just
Yeah,
say, I think you're correct that like institutionally, the institutional right is going to do what they do, regardless, right? Exactly. But I think what is different about this event is that, when you look at a guy like Charlie Kirk and you look at just the nature of his engagement, this is a guy who really built a movement engaging with ordinary people who are represented by these random Twitter accounts. There is, there is a very random nature to this kind of violence, and it has potential to make this violence much more commonplace than a 9/11. After 9/11, was I walking around thinking a bomb's going to go off at a school here or there? No. But when this happens,
I was.
Keaton. I was. No, but hold on a second.
I lived in New York.
I
lived in New York. I went to school 20 blocks from the World Trade Center.
Mm-hmm.
I remember distinctly.
A lot of people in New York were worried about that at that time.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah, I remember my mother worked for the UN. There were bomb threats being called there. I lived, blocks from
there was the
World Trade Center.
There was the Ricin mail.
Okay, fine.
Right?
All right.
But even more so than that, the actual threats of subsequent bombings, I was afraid of what the retribution was going to look like if the people on the plane happened to look like me. And in fact, They didn't look like me. They looked enough, though, like a bunch of Sikh cab drivers that didn't even share the religious or cultural identity of them, that they got rounded up and beat up in the streets for days and weeks and months after 9/11. Not to mention the million people in the Middle East who ended up getting killed by our forever wars and quote unquote retribution for those crimes. So like I think who we're seeing as victims of the fallout of this is affecting what we think the concern should be, where our fear should lie. Who exactly are we afraid of?
Okay, well, I think answer that a little bit better. I didn't mean to get sidetracked with the 9/11 example. Okay. But what I would say to that is that you have these two realities that live sort of parallel to each other. You have the online reality where it is the norm to just treat other people like absolute shit and to act like an animal at the first disagreement that someone has with you. We've all seen it in comment sections and live chats on YouTube streams and Twitter threads. And then you have real life where people are very hesitant to be that hostile towards people in that way. And I think moments like this are when those two realities sort of collide with each other. And I think the consequences of that can be a very, very marked increase in random political violence. And I don't think that, I mean, I'm speaking for myself. Obviously, I was 14 when 9/11 happened. My parents were in the World Trade Center the Thursday before because they were going to work a craft show that summer. We worked in the city various times throughout that fall and into the winter and spring. I can't argue with people's personal fears at the time. But what I can say is that I think given the toxic effects of the internet, combined with this just hyper polarized environment, which, yeah, we can talk about who's responsible for that. I think that's a 2-hour, 3-hour conversation right there in and of itself. I think when you have people, so many people whose lives are almost all online, it makes people very divorced from the implications of the way they treat other people. And then when they take that into the real world, where people can actually get hurt and killed, I think that creates the potential for a lot of random violence. And I think people have to take that danger very, very seriously and just take a minute to think about, is that a world you actually want to live in? Is that, you know, people are talking about, a lot of people on the right now are talking very vague, sort of ominous terms about this having awoken a sleeping giant, right? With the implication that there's going to be a civil war, right? And
right,
my hope is that, I promise I will wrap after this sentence. My hope is that it has awoken a sleeping giant of ordinary people who don't want a civil war and who will realize that these machines that we have built are killing us. That's what's happening.
So to be so clear, we're saying that you're reflecting on the insidiousness of internet culture as sort of a root cause here. I would just like to point out that Charlie Kirk was famous for, in real life, in a way that has gotten plaudits from Ezra Klein, going to college campuses and talking to people in real life, and in real life articulating bigoted statements and advocating for less rights and less humanity for people on the basis of being trans, Black, female, etc. This was, in fact, what he was doing at the moment he was killed.
All right, Brianna.
Right, but the people who engage with him in real life, hold on one second, though. I'm sorry. The people who engage with him, in real life aren't the ones who killed him. The one who killed him was a serially online Redditor, from what we can think about, right? That's my point.
But my point is, we are concerned, apparently, about the real world effects of online culture because a lone gunman shot Charlie Kirk, but not the fact that Charlie Kirk's vocal advocacy, both in real life and online, has caused people to do what exactly?
I did a whole monologue about this. I don't disagree with you about that. Has directly contributed
to the rise and sustained popularity of Donald Trump, the promulgation and increased funding of ICE, who's disappearing people from the streets, mass incarceration, mocking the police killing of civilian Americans of all races, to be frank, but disproportionately Black and brown. And the fact that we're sitting here saying, well, now there's an internet problem because Charlie Kirk was killed, and it wasn't an internet problem or a real life problem when all of these other things were happening and all of these other harms were befalling all of these marginalized groups, doesn't quite sit right with me. And when people are being disrespectful about Charlie Kirk online, I think some of that is an emotional response that says, I'm tired of being told that this one life, this genre of life, of someone who is affluent, of someone who is white and male, and someone who is a famous person, matters more than the consequences of all of the vitriol that he contributed to, and which is predominant in our country because the party that he belonged to and the politics that he subscribed to controls the Supreme Court, the White House, Congress, everything.
No, I don't really disagree with anything that you said. I would qualify. I don't see internet culture as a root cause of this, but I do see it as exacerbating this. And like I did a whole monologue. You can watch it. I'll send you the link to this.
Sure.
Making a lot of the points that you made. I am very sympathetic to the substance of a lot of what you just said, but I would just have to reiterate, the people who he argued with in real life on these campuses are not the ones who took it to this extreme and horrifying extent, which is to actually shoot him. From what we know at the moment, and maybe the reporting is wrong, maybe we'll learn something different. The guy who actually shot him was a guy who lived online and a guy who thought that it was okay based on his personality, which he experienced through the lens of the internet, to go and do a thing like this. That's my point. That's my point. It's not that the internet is the root cause of this. You want to talk about the root cause of this? This is a point I think you will be sympathetic to as someone who worked on the Bernie Sanders campaign. I told my wife in 2020 when they stole the primary from him a second time, I said, that's it for this country. This country is done. This country is done because Joe Biden is not going to do what is necessary to reverse this course that we're on, which is towards a wider gap between rich and poor, increased desperation, which is going to lead to massive increases in resentment and racism and xenophobia and anti-immigrant and hatred and the promulgation of all these scapegoats, LGBT people and that. So you want to take a macro picture of this. I think this is a social collapse that has been going on, really the last 30 years, if you want to know what I really think.
All right, so go
ahead.
That dovetails well with my classic Alex Jones take on all of this. I think that whatever happened with that shooter, whether he actually did the shot or whatever, I think there's a lot more going on there than meets the eye. Between the baseball signal guys and leaving the roof without a gun, and George Zinn, who was also a 9/11 witness. There's a lot going on there.
This is the guy, George Zinn, you're saying that there was a guy who kind of claimed credit. Yeah, and was a distraction, ostensibly. Also showed up in a 9/11 video, and that seems to be an odd coincidence. Has it been confirmed that that's actually the same guy?
I believe so. I mean, it's being pretty widely reported by people who I respect. So, yes, I believe so. So you look at all this, it looks pretty fishy. But all of that aside, a couple of years ago, before even the election, I did a segment about Vanity Fair, did an article called, I believe it was called The New Right, that basically laid out all this Curtis Yarvin and J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel. And the reporter had gone to their convention and described what they were talking about. And I came away from that article saying, these people are going to win because they understand that the way our society is being run is not sustainable. And they have a plan, a terrifying plan, but they have a plan for what the other side of that looks like. I think it's always a mistake to assume that your opponent is stupid. Particularly when your opponents are oligarchs and billionaires, people who, whether as in the case of Elon, he's not an engineer, this idea that he's some kind of Tony Stark figure is absurd, but he manipulated the system to become this very wealthy man in a brilliant way, right? He was smart about that, wasn't he? Sure, he got a head start, but a lot of people do. They don't end up where he ended up. So he was smart about that. He was smart enough to prop up Trump and use him to get his whole regulatory wish list. So you can't assume these people are stupid, and you can't assume they don't know history. You can't assume that they don't know, as Peter Turchin wrote about, that when you get this combination of elite overproduction and mass immiseration, you get revolutions. You can't assume they don't understand that. I think that a lot of them, the smarter of them, the ones that are really leading this kind of rebellion of the elites, this revolution of the elites, They understand it. And they're saying, well, how do you avoid the guillotines in this moment? You know, historically, you get a Russian Revolution, you get the guillotine, you get a popular uprising that's bad for people like us. We've never had this technology before. We've never had this technology. We're on the verge of really not needing labor. That was always a problem. The peasants were always able to leverage their labor against the aristocrats. The serfs were able to leverage their labor. We're right on the verge of not really needing labor. And in social media, we have a means of propagandizing the serfs and the peasants that the czar could only have dreamt about. There's never been anything like what we have. If we can just keep these morons, these useless eaters distracted with culture wars long enough, send them charging off in this direction and that direction and the other direction, while we build this techno-feudal world where we don't really need labor because we've automated the factories, what few we have left are not going to have enough force and critical mass to overthrow us. And with AI, we can create a surveillance state that doesn't even have the Achilles heel of surveillance states, subversion from within, because it's AI. There's no person with a conscience who's going to decide they're going to join the rebellion and work against you. I believe that's what's happening. I believe that when you see someone like Elon Musk addressing this Nazi rally that they just had in England and saying it's you or them, does he believe that? Does he believe that they're no, I don't think so. Does Matt Walsh, who I consider smarter than the average person in his space, does he really believe there's an existential, violent threat that this Charlie Kirk assassination constitutes? I don't think he believes that. I think they're the real accelerationists. They want to take an opportunity like this to further social decay, social collapse. They want to bring on a civil war so that you can collapse whatever remaining institutions of the state there are to put any check on the power of people like themselves.
I think that's probably right.
I think that's true, Russell. I got to ask this, though, and I know we got to go, but...
Yeah, I don't mean to pull a Zaid on you, but I do have to leave soon.
Hang on, before you go, I got to ask you this question. Well, remind me. Go ahead and say what you're going to say, and I got to ask you something.
Just that, I declined to go on Piers Morgan. I just sent them a text saying I didn't want to go tomorrow. Because in part, and for this reason, I think everything you said, Russell, is accurate. My problem, and likely, my problem is this. What's the off-ramp from that? And has there ever been a revolution that hasn't been violent? And the reason that I don't want to be forced to talk publicly about this is because I don't want to be presented with this question. The framing that everyone keeps doing is that all violence is wrong. I'm not a pacifist. I would love to be a pacifist. But who is it? Kwame Ture, who said, or Malcolm, I'm sorry, one of them said that for nonviolence protests to work, you have to have a society with a conscience.
I think that was Ture. I could be wrong.
I would love there to never be violence, obviously. But I'm not going to sit here and say, I think that all the violence that's currently being meted out against the poor and disenfranchised should continue. I think 68,000 people dying every year, preventable deaths from a lack of health insurance is violence. I think the Gaza genocide is violence.
Sure.
So I think environmental, people dying from environmental racism and air pollution, all those things are violence. So I'm not going to, if I get hit with that question, I don't want to have to answer it in a way that is dishonest, and I don't want to have to answer it honestly and then get a target put on my back.
Yeah.
And I think that's a conundrum that I think the left hasn't really dealt with, and I think part of why I find myself bristling at some of the Jacobin magazines and stuff that are really going out of that. Jacobin, who's the magazine named after?
Yeah.
Haitian revolutionary fighters talking about, oh my God, violence is never the answer. I mean, it's very selective who we're talking about. And I don't mean in a Yeah, go
but
ahead,
this
go
is what I mean, and this is what I've talked about this when this has come up in the past, is that I think, look, and this kind of cuts to a lot of what we've been talking about, even dating back to some of the Twitter files stuff, is the left is not organized and the left is not ready for that fight. The left has no basis
Sure.
of power to win that fight. So if for leftists to be talking like that, you may as well be waving a flag around saying, Palantir, here I am. You know,
Talking like
the government
what? 'Cause
can
to be clear,
vaporize
I'm
any
not
one of us in
saying-
seconds if they want. Between the surveillance technology and the drone technology, we are all Palestinians in that respect.
Yes,
Whereas we
yes.
exist at their mercy. That's just the fact. And
yes, and
so,
to be clear, talking like that, I don't want it to be characterized like I was saying that leftists need to take arms and go into the street. I'm not making that point. I'm making the point that ultimately, any revolution that's been successful has been violent, including left revolutions. And I agree with you that the left is not prepared for that, but I'm also not going to sit there and say we're going to vote ourselves out of this mess, because I think what Russell set out, the sort of game plan that Russell set out, is accurate and true, and electoral politics isn't going to stop that trajectory.
no, but if you look at, I mean, just to take this example, look at how Charlie Kirk amassed the influence that he had. It took a very long time. It took a lot of real life engagement with people. It took a lot of going from campus to campus, owning
it took
one
a lot
lib
of money.
after a lib. Yes, but
a lot of people
course
are
they
arguing,
had.
look what happened when he started not singing from the choir book. Right?
What I'm
Yeah,
saying
that's another
is
good
that I think if we're thinking about what an off ramp could look like, assuming you want an off ramp, which it sounds like you do want it. Well, let me just ask you this: would you like an off ramp to civil war, a social collapse with normalized political violence? I'm assuming you would want an off ramp to that, right?
I want an off ramp from Russell's techno-feudalist projection of the future, where we're eating, ground roach bars.
Right, but this breakdown into chaos is in. But I think what we have to understand is that this breakdown into chaos is in service of that. I think that's a lot of what Russell was saying.
Yeah,
A lot of these figures
Of course.
are accelerationists, not in a communist sense, but in a fascist sense, right? Like they want
course.
society to
Right.
break down so that, because they're the ones with the power and the resources to rebuild it how they want, which is
Right.
techno-feudalism, right?
Right.
I believe look, I can't tell you what the off ramp to that is, but I can tell you, I think, with confidence, that the road we're on is just leading one way, the wrong way. And I think that all of this is exacerbated by people's addiction to a digital panopticon where we are just encouraged to brutalize each other, not understanding, some people, tragically, not understanding the difference between brutalizing someone online and brutalizing people in real life. I think that is exacerbating this to a large extent. I'm not saying it's the root cause of it. I think that is doing a lot more harm than good. That's what I think. And so the first thing people can
3% of
do
the
is
public
take a
is on
walk.
Twitter?
Take a long walk. That's the first step on the off-ramp, I would say.
Keaton, if I
Turn
take
your
a
phone
walk-
off and take a walk.
First of all, majority of Americans don't live in walkable neighborhoods. A majority of Americans are working, not a majority of Americans working multiple jobs, but most Americans experience a level of precarity where they have very limited free time, especially if they have families.
Right,
The
so
majority
don't
of
do this
Americans
so
are paying
much.
$20,000.
That's what I'm saying.
So, but this is my point. Like, the idea that the 3% of Americans who are on Twitter every day, or however many are on Reddit or Discords or servers or whatever every day, should be the focus. That Charlie Kirk's murder is the violence that should trigger us to do introspection, and not the 15 homeless people that I pass
That's
every
not what
day
I'm
when I
saying,
go
Brianna.
outside.
That's
Sure.
not- yeah, but I'm
And
not.
I don't mean to, I know that you're not explicitly saying that, but I feel like the implication, and not just you, but like the broader kind of political attention to Charlie Kirk right now, it is intrinsically valuing and like taking as like we need to have lessons learned from one very discrete, frankly, sort of anomalous moment of violence, and ignoring the enormous volume of institutional and systemic violence that is invisibilized because we have a media and political system that tells us that that's normal. So who is benefiting from being told that that's normal, and Charlie Kirk is the anomaly that we should all be focusing on?
No, but that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that I believe that this murder is being used by a lot of people, a lot of very powerful people with very sinister agendas, to usher in a normalization of this kind of paranoia and violence. And I do think there are a lot of people online who are taking the bait, whether they know it or not. I think if you're going on TikTok and gleefully celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk, I think you're taking the bait. I think you're giving them exactly what they want. I think you're giving them.
Can I just ask if you offered a similar kind of reservations about the reaction to Luigi Mangione?
You know what? I'll admit to you. You know what? I'm very glad you asked that question, actually, because no, I didn't. I didn't express those same reservations about him, and there's probably a bit of personal bias in that because I'm in this space, right? And Charlie Kirk was in this space, right? There could be some personal bias there, but hang on. But hang on a second. I have to. I would not be a man if I didn't say this. Our friend Caleb Maupin, right after that happened, wrote a book, No More Days of Lead, I think that's what it is, where he said, you know what, as tempting as it is to have some fun at that CEO's expense, what we really need is serious organization and not I won't say a glorification of violence since I never went that far, but yeah, I shared some funny memes as we all did. He was very much against that from the beginning. And he probably took a lot of shit for it, but I have to be man enough to say in retrospect, I think he was right. I think what you do need is to organize your way out of this, not to troll your way out of this when things like this happen. And and we're going to have him on the show soon, but I want to say that on the record for him.
Yeah, Brianna, to go to what you're saying, it's the Joker speech in Dark Knight, right? People here, 2,000 people got blown up in the Middle East. It's fine, but you kill one mayor, everyone loses their minds. Because it's not part of the plan. That is a bigger issue than Charlie Kirk. I mean, you could argue that's an eternal issue.
Well, right.
The idea that very visible elite people's lives matter more. I always say that. If your next door neighbor robbed the corner store and they said, well, they're going to jail, you'd say, well, good, right? You got these people who run banks who rob millions of people. You got Mark Andreessen makes a living creating dodgy fintech programs that rob people of their life savings. That guy he goes on Rogan, right?
JP Morgan protecting Epstein. It goes on and on and on and on. You have healthcare CEOs with the highest denial rate in the country, killing people and stressing their families out when they should be concerned with their dying loved ones because they're denying their insurance claims.
Sure.
People are
incidentally.
People are brainwashed. They're brainwashed.
But
they're hypnotized. Like what Keaton is talking about with the social media. It's partly because people have really been brain damaged by that. I mean, honestly, they've been brain damaged.
How are we back at the social media of it all? I think Keaton's point that I'm a content creator and I don't want to get got is honest. I think that's real. And I got to say, I'm a content creator. I don't want to target on my back either.
I don't want the audience to get got. I don't want the average
the audience
Twitter
is anonymous.
No, but this is the thing.
Not as anonymous as they think.
Not as anonymous as they think. That's my point. That's my point. If you're going to go on TikTok and mouth off, you're not as anonymous as you think you are. That's what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the whole space. So when I say it's because I am in this line of work, yeah, obviously it hits harder. I'd be a liar if I say it didn't hit harder. But I'm talking about the audience. I'm talking. I told Russell offline. I said this whole space. The podcast space, the online YouTuber, space, it's very much like the Roman Colosseum, except where the gladiators watch the audience kill each other. Like the real fights happen in the audience, and that space is not as anonymous as people think when they record themselves saying this shit.
I just want to get back to this. I think you were honest and correct that when you say the different reaction to this, especially among the media figures that control the narrative, obviously. They are the media figures, including lefty ones. The reason there's this a lefty defense and outpouring of emotion from Cenk and, people I like and respect, like, Crystal and the Jacobin writers and all of that, is because they see themselves in Charlie Kirk. And they don't want to have the same fate as Charlie Kirk. And I think that's human and understandable. And I also think the reflection we should have is why we are all seeing ourselves in Charlie Kirk and aghast but we don't see ourselves so easily. The public broadly, not you and me, literally we, don't see ourselves so viscerally in the George Floyds of the world, or the victims of Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO, or the people of Palestine, or Iraqis, the million Iraqis who were killed in the post 9/11 wars, and on and on and on and on. That is something I think that we need to be wrestling with. And why is it? And I appreciate you sort of saying that you feel different, like saying, well, let me revise my position on Luigi, given how I'm feeling in this moment.
Sure.
But I challenge you, maybe the revision needs to be in the other direction.
Well, what I would say to that is, like, look,
there.
I just DM'd you my whole monologue about Charlie Kirk, my first thoughts. You can play as much as you want of it in this episode if it helps the episode. But what I would say is, it's not just about me seeing myself in Charlie Kirk. I personally don't really empathize with Charlie Kirk. I've had nothing but bad things to say.
Not seeing yourself in him substantively, but the fact that you are a content creator.
No, but I see
and that you are vulnerable.
Of course, and I'm not going to deny that. But more than that, I see everyone in that crowd in everyone on Twitter. I see what I see here is a collision of worlds, one in which there is absolutely no holds barred barbarism, which is all fine on Twitter. It's not all fine in real life. And whether this guy was the Redditor that the government is saying he was, or whether this is a deep state plot that goes beyond that, which I'm obviously very sympathetic to, what are they trying to turn this into? They are trying to turn this into a culture war turned civil war. And what is the vessel for that? It is the internet and the social media platforms. That is what is going to be what ushers this in. But this has been happening since a long time before. This idea that because of Charlie Kirk, they're trying to use Charlie Kirk to start a culture war, and everybody is playing into it by dancing on his graves on the internet. The culture war has been going on since the dawn of the country. The war has been being fought since the dawn of forever. It has nothing to do with Charlie Kirk's just a blip. His assassination is just a blip along a long line of Republicans selectively using whatever they can to gin up outrage. And I think that buying into it and saying, well, we need to tone police ourselves. This is not a direct analogy, but I have to say, it's making me think of a tweet I did recently where I pointed out that leftists are arguing that it's correct for Zoran Mamdani to disclaim having said that NYPD, which is quite obviously racist, is racist. Sure.
Even though he's 20 points up in the polls and has no reason to capitulate or do anything differently in his messaging. They're saying the left has got to be careful. The left can't. Could you see the analogy? The left can't make people angry. The left can't dance on anybody's grave. The left can't make memes and jokes. The left can't say something obvious like the police are racist, or we're gonna quote unquote lose. And meanwhile, you've got conservatives on Fox saying we should do lethal injections of homeless people in the streets.
Of course.
And that guy didn't get fired. He made an apology today, and we're just gonna keep on keeping on.
We're covering it later tonight.
I get fired for quote unquote rolling my eyes at a hostage sister's victim. That guy gets to stay on prime time in the air. And by the way, Matt Taibbi does a victory lap when I'm fired from the Hill and says I was fired for my substantive bad conduct and bad journalism, and not because of Zionists beating down the door of the Hill trying to get me fired for about 6 months.
Okay, so that is a good opportunity for it not to be a non sequitur, because I wanted to ask you this. We were talking about Taibbi, because I've seen you guys have been going back and forth a little bit again. That's been reignited a little bit. He keeps saying he's asked you to call him and you won't call him. Is that true? And if so, why?
Ask him to call him? No. He's got an open invitation to the show any old time, obviously. Of course. I would love for him to come on. I don't have his number. I don't know how I would call him.
I think he wants you to call him.
I don't have his number. I don't know Matt Taibbi like that. Anytime I've spoken to Matt Taibbi in my life has been on the air, and you guys have seen it.
All right. There you go.
All right. Well, there you go.
I don't know him. But if he wants to DM me, he can feel free to DM me and we can set something up.
Okay.
All right.
So back to the subject at hand. I'm going to be very careful how I say this, although we're not live streaming, so cut it out if you will. I said this to Keaton the other day. If you celebrate the 4th of July, then you believe in violent revolution, right?
Of course.
I mean, that wasn't passive resistance. That was revolution. I think a lot of what Keaton is saying, and I would agree with, and I also agree with what you're saying. The left doesn't have any kind of meaningful organization, and that's, I believe, by design. I mean, it's related to what I described. I don't believe that Thiel and Vance and Curtis Yarvin popped up in a vacuum. I think they're the latest iteration of something that's been going on since the Powell memo in the 70s, this prolonged effort to destroy the left on every level, to infiltrate the media, to control narratives until today. I don't believe that the left can't produce better leaders than it does. I believe that's very much by design. I believe the weakest and least threatening and most willing to cooperate with power are elevated and
100%.
allowed to function, and the ones who would be a real threat, who have a real systemic critique, who actually might wake people out of their hypnosis, those people are not allowed a platform. And if they get anywhere, I don't think it's very safe for them, to be honest. That is why the right has the power that they have. But that's the reason that, like, you're right. It's part of this brainwashing that people place more value on the life of Charlie Kirk than they place on all of the people who are victims of these systemic injustices. They're so brainwashed, they don't even remember what a systemic critique is. You know, we just went out to St. Louis and interviewed Omali Yeshitela for a documentary. And one of the things that was so arresting about him to me the first time I heard him speak was, wow, man, like, I haven't heard anybody current speak like that, because, you know, he's coming out of that Black Power movement from the 60s and 70s that had a systemic critique, that had an international vision about class and oppression and racism. There's a reason that even if you go to younger people today who would consider themselves political, a lot of them just have never even heard that stuff, man. It was taken out of the conversation.
Intentionally. Yeah, very. And the attacks on academia, the attacks on critical race theory, any kind of a cultural Marxism, that's all an attack on the idea of having a structural critique of anything.
Right.
And
But at the same time, I know you talked to Norm about this. Sorry. I think they elevated people like Kendi. I think they elevated people like D'Angelo to get that kind of backlash.
Yes and no. I think that there was first of all, if we all of these years out are still just pointing to Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi, I would humbly suggest that, as irritating as one might find those two books, the left should have had some humility and not open the door or not had a strident defense of academia and like kind of left progressive academic discourse scholarship, simply because there were two pop culture books that they didn't like. By the way, I also read White Fragility with the intent to write a takedown piece of it in Current Affairs like years ago during 2020. Like, Nathan sent it to me, and I had to tell him, I read it. I don't think it should be the be all end all of everybody's like political ideology, but it's really inoffensive. I gotta say, have either of you read the book?
I'm much too afraid to read that book.
It's just your basic like, hey, have you considered that like racism exists? I mean, like, it's been years now, but I remember thinking like, there's just. It's like a really basic primer for like a white person who's never been around anybody of color before about like what kind of things, how the world looks different to different kind of people. It's really not that deep. So like,
it's funny.
I got halfway through it, and look, you know, we've given a lot of Taibbi bashing here. I'll give him some love. He is right about the fact that her writing is almost unreadable.
Well, who cares?
That's why I got through.
Our political institutions are being turned inside out, and we're still talking about some white woman who got on the New York Times high book list. And so people started reading it because of white guilt. But we're going to let them tear apart our liberal institutions, our academic institutions over this. So I do think that like
yes,
the
but I
Taibbi
think that's
phenomenon,
the purpose of elevating people like that. I think that's the reason.
Sure.
I think there are people
Sure.
who have systemic critiques who are not so off-putting.
But I think
repulsive,
part of
and out
why
touch.
the anti-woke movement was able to get so much traction is because there wasn't, when I was growing up, you know, I'm 40 years old. When I was growing up and in school in like the late 90s and early aughts and in college in the early aughts, there was a lot of conversation about systemic critique and things that are frankly very basic stuff that's in the Robin DiAngelo book. And I think that part of why in the post-Obama era, the anti-woke stuff got so much traction and so many of the left also, I think, because of a desire to like seem reasonable and credible and like not like the corny libs, bought into that critique, is because we didn't have we've lost the recipes. Like we lost the background and like basic statistical knowledge. Like I see people right now arguing, Charlie Kirk never said anything racist. What's racist about what he said? Like they can't even identify racism anymore because they're all so racist. And because they're like, racism doesn't exist. This is what Charlie Kirk said to me. Racism doesn't exist because you got into Harvard. I said W.E.B. Du Bois got into Harvard in the Reconstruction era. Was there no racism 20 years after slavery ended? Like, people don't know anything.
Sure.
And people don't know things like the basic study that shows if you have a black seeming name, you're like 20% less, 30% less likely to get a job as someone with a white sounding name. Like people are really walking around believing that racism doesn't exist because Obama exists or because I exist. And there's even liberal institutions like the Robin DiAngelos of the world that used to provide the sociological information that made people understand why there was inequity in the world. We don't talk about it anymore. So when Charlie Kirk shows up and says, well, it's because black people are intellectually inferior and black women don't have the ability to engage in the public sphere, that seems credible to folks.
Yes, and I think it is very hard for a lot of people who are not of those identities to understand how maddening that is. I've often made the point, man, working class white people have had it bad for what, 30 years, 40 years, and you guys were all ready to go storm the Capitol and shit. Even have the golden age feel. You're already this in your feelings, and it's been a few decades that things have not really been great for your parts of the country and for your communities. But then at the same time, you will not give any credit to other people for having a right to feel that way. You think it's unreasonable. People who have had it much worse for much longer. Yes, that is true. With people like Kendi and DiAngelo and people of that ilk, like, I don't agree that this was completely isolated. I see it as part of the same thing. I think they wanted a reactionary backlash. You can't tell me that you can't produce a Malcolm X, that you can't produce an MLK, that the only thing you can produce is a Robin DiAngelo to speak on those kinds of issues. And I think let me just finish. I think also, and this is, I've often made this point when I've talked about this. I even agree with a lot of the theories in there. It's that I don't think the purpose of it is actually to solve these problems. I think it's to keep the conversation purely on identity and to avoid
to that.
Broader critiques of class and economics, because the last thing they want is for workers to come together with a systemic critique. That's my issue with it.
The problem was what was done with the book. Yes, the problem was what was done with the book and the fact that the Democratic Party made its politics about Oprah getting racially profiled instead of what actually working class people needed to do.
But I think that's why you heard
but that's
of that
not the book. But that's not the book. That's not Robin. Like, the focus should be on why the Democratic Party chose to lean into identity politics instead of class politics, and that's not Robin DiAngelo's fault. God bless her. Like, so that. But that's all I'm saying. Like, that should be the argument. That should be the critique. And I don't think. Sorry, you had said, Robin DiAngelo. Oh God, you had said something about comparing, why we can't mint Malcolm X's anymore. Again, I don't think it's because Robin DiAngelo exists. I think it's because the Malcolm X's get killed. Malcolm X got killed.
Yes,
Anybody
yes,
like him
that's
got
exactly
killed.
what I believe. They
And,
elevate
by the way,
these people. That's always been my critique.
And they killed off a bunch of Black Lives Matter protesters without a lot of commentary from anybody, including left media. And the left media wants to cover, as I did also, the corruption by the effective heads of the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the squandering of the money that was given. But we don't want to help prevent those elites from having become the head of the movement to begin with. And at a certain point, I think we have to be introspective. And I said this to Norm too. To what extent did our willingness to do the critique of the excesses of the left and liberalism without pointing out the role that a kind of conservative ideology among both corporate parties was playing in ensuring that the people who were standing in for for the left were these corrupt, horrible, easily made fun of people.
Sure.
Opened up the space for us to now have no leaders, no kind of like academic credibility, no sociological basis for our arguments about structural racism, no organization. And now we're being reduced to saying violence is never the answer, instead of saying, well, realistically speaking, it's going to likely come through a violent revolution. How do we get prepared? And by the way, the violence, I'm not talking about like gunning people down like Charlie Kirk. I'm talking about tying yourself to oil pipelines and blocking traffic and putting your body on the line in a way that the state has been ratcheting up criminal penalties for years, again, without enough focus from the left on what's happening in these cop cities, why people are getting arrested under RICO charges for passing out flyers, all of those sorts of things. And
I think this might be a good place to not that it's my show, but to maybe wrap.
You guys have to go. I know that you guys have to go.
We have
a show to do in a little bit. But I think it's easier to get organized in that way and easier to movement build in that way if you are not walking into the trap that these tech oligarchs have laid for us. And that is my point. That is what I've been arguing. I would fully reject that I have put Charlie Kirk's life above anybody else's. I certainly haven't. But what I would say is that this event is being seized upon by very nefarious sources who want social chaos. They want a societal collapse. They want civil war. They want randomized violence. And I think that going on TikTok and mouthing off about how happy you are that this happened is giving them what they want, because it's giving them the pretext to crush you before you can organize. Before you can organize in real life the way you need to.
They don't need a pretext.
You're making yourself visible to that. This is what you're doing. You're waving a big flare in the air, saying, "Come get me."
So now we can't be visible. Well, how far are we going to take this?
I'm saying that is ultimately fake activism. It's not real activism.
How far are we going to take this?
It's just an emotional outburst. Real activism is doing what the African People's Socialist Party does. They create farmers markets. They build bakeries. They organize. That's organizing.
How far are we going to take this? Because people are being put on a list for saying, I personally think that Charlie Kirk was...
Of course I'm against that.
Okay. So I can sit here and say, the fact that I don't like Charlie Kirk, I don't agree with his beliefs, gets me put on a list. Should I not say that? How far are we going to take the censorship chain? Because it, quote unquote, feeds into the techno-dystopian agenda. What am I allowed to say? And here's my final point. I have argued with someone like Robbie Suave on Rising about something like the Haitian Revolution. And he says, well, people killed white babies during the Haitian Revolution. I'm not going to be sucked into a conversation where the implication of this debate is that the Haitians should remain enslaved and subjugated because a white baby were killed. Aren't you sad about that white baby? Yeah, I wish the people who had enslaved the people of Haiti had let them free without there having to be a violent revolution where a white baby got killed.
Yeah,
I wish that weren't the case. But I'm not going to sit here and focus on a white baby when I know the The reason that we're doing that is to try to put down the idea that the violent revolution that was the Haitian Revolution wasn't a net positive and one of the most important revolutionary actions in global history.
Well,
in global history. Do you know what I'm saying? And I feel like the analogy is the Charlie Kirk. I understand on a personal level, on a moral level, I don't want my babies to die. I don't want anybody to be shot down. I abhor gun violence. But I am not going to get caught in a rhetorical trap where I say that we need to silence ourselves and also prime the public that revolutionary activity is in fact wrong and bad and dangerous.
That's not, but I reject that. That's revolutionary activity. That's not revolutionary activity. Random acts of violence are not revolutionary.
But that's not what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I'm talking about the Haitian Revolution.
Talking about speaking out.
I'm not going to prime the pump for saying all violence is bad. We need to hyper focus on Charlie Kirk when we should not be buying into the trap of the rhetorical trap. That's the rhetorical trap they're trying to set for us. Oh, but don't you care about isn't it bad to kill a white baby? Isn't it bad to enslave an entire nation of black people?
Norm Finkelstein has talked about the Nat Turner Rebellion in ways that I found to be, yes, obviously right on. And so I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying let's not conflate revolutionary acts with random acts of senseless violence.
I don't think I'm doing that, but I think Russell what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, look, I'm not saying you're doing that, but I'm saying that there are a lot of people who are taking to TikTok thinking they're fighting a revolution when they're not.
That's what
they're doing a dance for Palantir to come black bag them. That's what they're doing, and that's what's going to happen if people don't start taking things a little bit more seriously. That's all I have to say.
I think you talk about two different things. I think Keaton is really focused on the people who are going up and saying, yeah, they should go get more of them.
Which I personally, I believe exists. I personally haven't seen, and I think it's a trap.
That's what I'm talking about, Brianna. I'm not talking about what that is what I'm talking about, to be very clear. And
Keaton,
look,
I think it's also a trap to say like that some hyper minority group of people on the internet is what we should be focused on.
But that's what they always do. This is my point.
But that's what conservatives are doing no matter what. No matter what. We can never police the public in a way that somebody somewhere isn't going to say something inappropriate. This is Bernie bro shit all over again.
No,
why are we giving voice? Why are we elevating the legitimacy of that critique in the least?
Well, because first of all, I think it's a sick sentiment to put out there, number one, just intrinsically. And number two,
who cares?
I think, look, I'm one man. I can only do what I can do as one man. But what I could do to people, the advice I could offer to people before they go ahead and publicize that sentiment in that way is to think about what you are playing into and what you are ushering in by doing that. And I think there are a lot of people. You want to respectability
politics the left out of having any backbone whatsoever, I'm afraid.
No, I don't believe that is the case. I mean, if you watch what I had to say, I encourage you to watch what I had to say more fully about this. What I'm saying is that I don't think look, I never thought it useful to deny the excesses of certain people saying, well, there's nobody out there who are saying they're happy he got shot. No, there are enough.
I didn't say there were none. I said there's so few.
And they're not. I don't know.
Immaterial.
I mean, I'm not sure about that.
I want to be so clear. Again, the right is out there saying kill homeless people in the streets, and they're winning.
Billions of dollars to mental health and the homeless population. A lot of them don't want to take the programs. A lot of them don't want to get the help that is necessary. You can't give them a choice. Either you take the resources that we're going to give you, or you decide that you're going to be locked up in jail. That's the way it has to be now.
Or involuntary lethal injection or something. Just kill them.
Yeah, Brian, why did it have to get to this point?
Right. I would say this. We're not voting for the right people. In North Carolina, wake up.
Yeah. Donald Trump never apologized for a goddamn thing. And you're sitting here being like, oh, no. Come on, Keaton. Oh, no. Some TikToker in Oklahoma tweeted out that they're glad Charlie Kirk is dead. Yeah. Okay. Why is that my business? Donald Trump, a professional newscaster
I'm not saying
on
it's your
Fox
business.
News.
We can.
I mean, our business collectively as a left to police. I don't want to buy into the trap that unless we are perfect, we deserve to be victimized. This is a free country, and frankly, what we should be doing is defending the rights of that person in Tulsa to tweet whatever the hell they want. Just like Charlie Kirk and all of his ilk had a right to tweet that George Floyd deserved to die. Over and over again.
I believe
and nobody
they have the
on the right Nobody on the right, from the President of the United States on down, ever said, oh, that was inappropriate. And our movement lacks validity and legitimacy because someone on the internet tweeted George Floyd deserves to die and his daughter deserves to suffer, which they did.
I'm with you on that.
This is why.
What I'm saying is that, don't make their job easier for them by mistaking, a TikTok video for a serious revolutionary act or a serious act.
And you don't make their job easier for them by validating the narrative that the merit and value and legitimacy of our movement is somehow contingent on whether or not some kid on the other side of the country has a right to free speech, even if I find it distasteful.
But okay, all right. I would say that we are. This is another bitter pill. I don't know what movement we have. What movement? What institutional power do we have? What do we have?
We could spend more time talking about that if we weren't concerned trolling about TikToks. Sorry. Go ahead, Russell. I'm sorry.
This is part of the problem. They have all the power.
Money.
You're right, and money. You're right in principle. But you've got a left and a left, non-left, whatever, a political working class that is so completely ignorant of the whole theory of the case.
Of course.
So you just don't even have. I saw Chris Smalls at a Palestine rally a few weeks ago, and I got to interview him for a few minutes, and I asked him, "Would you call for a general strike?" And this is a guy who's on the ground doing real organizing. He immediately, without missing a beat, said, "We're not ready for that. We don't even have 10% union organization."
Well, yes and no, because he was on this show not so long ago saying that absolutely we should be working toward a general strike. And I don't want to confuse those two things.
Working towards it, sure.
But I think it's important because there's a part of the institutional left, the kind of Sam Cedars of the world, where if you bring up a general strike, they laugh. They fundamentally have some pikers like this too. They laugh the idea down. I think there's a big difference between saying, I'm going to laugh the idea down and saying, let's be talking about a general strike because we're trying to let people know what it is and work toward it. And when Nick Cruz and Revolutionary Blackout and all of them just did a general strike live stream to have organizers on and talk about what this would look like prospectively, sorry, no disrespect, but Hassan and Sam and all of them made fun of the notion of doing that. So that is not what Chris Smalls is doing.
That's not what I'm suggesting.
That's not what he's saying.
He was making it clear, we're not in that position. Because I said very directly, would you call for a general strike, meaning now? That was what he was responding to be clear. No, we're not ready to do that right now. But he wasn't against it in principle.
Yeah.
It's just, look, Brianna, no joke. And, this is pretty much what we've been talking about. These are some psycho fascist motherfuckers, man. You look at Stephen Miller there talking about how they're going to come for you. And that guy's a sicko. You're talking about an administration and you're talking about an elite class generally that increasingly is starting to bear fair comparison to some of the worst elites that have ever existed. When you see people like Elon knowing full well that he's throwing match on kerosene there, saying to that crowd, it's you or them. These are some really evil, sick people. And as we've made clear many times on ICE, you think they're spending billions of dollars on this hiring spree and building prisons to just go after immigrants? What happens when they're done? You think they're going to dismantle all that? Just like the military-industrial complex. Now it's an industry. An industry. Once you have that as an industry, now you need a war. Now you have capitalists who make their fortune from it. Now you have employees who work for it. That's what you're going to get with this domestic police force. So who are they going to turn them on? Well, when you look at Kilmeade talking about euthanizing the homeless, you're getting a taste of it. Maybe they won't go that far, but maybe they'll start locking them up, and then they're going to start looking at you. And they're not hiding it. They're saying straight out that's who they want to come after. So I think the point Keaton is making is yes, in principle, sure. In reality, they're holding all the cards.
They hold all the cards, and not only do they hold all of the cards, but think about how they rode into power. These people rode into power by convincing most Americans that it was really important that they make sure that a trans kid didn't swim against their daughter in high school. That is,
wait a minute.
This is how this happens. Is they have convinced most Americans that the left is so repulsive that they just had to hand the keys to the people who hold the keys right now. I figured you might reject that, but I don't.
Well, no.
So the question you have to ask is,
because you said yourself, you already acknowledged that there was an off ramp that was some combination of 2016 and 2020. So it's not that I'm going to sit here and argue that they didn't do fear mongering around trans. But
the 2016 and 2020 were not about those issues. That's what they did. They neutralized the economic left so they could represent them in the worst light using these culture war issues. And now they're in power. And the only way you're going to dislodge them from power...
Liberals neutralized the economic left.
Yes, because the liberals won the internecine war on the left. They won. And now the left is represented by liberals who put these issues front and center.
No, they're not.
And they have put us where we are. Yes, I blame the liberals as much for this situation as I do the fascists themselves. But the point is that the way these people rode into power is by convincing most ordinary people that they should trust them over how the left represents itself. And the only way out is to convince most ordinary people that they made a mistake putting these creeps in power. And you are not, I'm telling you, sure as I'm sitting here, you are not going to do that by jumping onto TikTok and gloating about the murder of a 31-year-old father.
First of all, you're completely conflating two things. But the reason that Trump was able to win was
crashing out.
Wait a minute. Yeah. The reason that Trump was able to win because he successfully delivered an economic populist message that liberals chose to put down in the form of the
first two times.
Campaign.
I don't concede that this time.
So
they won on immigration. They won on
Donald Trump.
Yeah.
But immigration is an economic argument as well.
Donald Trump, not the way they're presenting.
Wait a minute. But let me come on, guys. Let me say the thing.
Yeah.
Let me just.
All right, go ahead.
Donald Trump won in 2016 on Clinton was wrong about trade policy, that she and her husband backed trade policies that sent jobs overseas, that combined with immigrants, quote unquote, taking your job in a lax border meant that you had fewer financial opportunities that you had before, and that it was a aggressively economic populist message that was much less like people. When you ask people what Trump said that was racist in 2016, they say things like Mexico's not sitting its best. Right? That was sort of like, I'm not saying that was great. It was definitely a dog whistle, but it's nowhere near the kind of rhetoric that we had today. And I would argue that the right is able to be more empowered with respect to culture war as the left liberals cede more ground in an economic context. And so I'm not quite as doomerist about, I don't think there's an intrinsic appeal. I think most Americans think that screaming tranny is not like cool or normal or nice. You have Bill Kristol tweeting today. Did you see that? In defense of trans people. Bill Kristol tweeted basically today that, it goes without saying that trans people deserve like rights and equal protection and opportunity under the law. Oh, here it is. It should be needless to say, weird framing, but it should be needless to say, but it is perhaps at this moment worth saying that transgender individuals have the same right as anyone else to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Don't read the comments. Don't read the comments. So like, it's not that like you're winning because of the trans stuff. It's that there's a void that can be filled. So this is all to a greater point about though movement building. And I just want to say this because all of the other stuff is a distraction. Movement building and the left's ability to build a movement has nothing to do with an extremely small minority of people on the internet who are always, no matter how much we complain about it, going to say what they're going to say. And just like Bernie bending the knee on the idea that Bernie bros were a problem only fed the fire of liberals coming after him over the Bernie bro stuff, just like Zoran bending the knee on Israel and the cops and all of these things is only going to fuel the fire and not insulate him against his critics at all. The best it will do is lose him some of his supporters. Us sitting around saying, oh, we don't have the capacity for a real revolution, and also those people on the internet are hurting our cause, is feeding into the fire of the argument that they want to have against us. If we want to talk about the fact that we don't have revolutionary capacity, let's talk about how to build it. And let's build it actively in the conversations that we're having. But what I don't want to do is feed into anything that is the kind of doomerism that I frankly experience coming from the establishment left media, which says we're going to smirk and laugh at the idea of a general strike because we think the real solution is that AOC is going to get us out of it by getting us to vote harder next time.
Yes. I mean, I agree with that. I would say also, to the extent that we have influence online, don't forget these people, we do talk about the online space as this very small space. Well, we're in it, right? And we can communicate these ideas to people who are online. And what I see a lot of right now is people who are very active online, who have, modest followings online, even large followings online, who have these statements of theirs reinforced online, deluding themselves into thinking that they are part of a robust and formidable political movement, and they are not.
Who is this? Can you give me an example of this?
I'm talking about people who think that it's a great idea to go ahead and, gloat about this murder because they're getting the reinforcements of the likes and the clicks and the notoriety.
I think I understand what you're saying.
I don't know any of these people by name. I'm saying these people think that they are leading a revolution, and they are not. They are walking right into a techno-feudalist trap, in my opinion.
I think I understand what you're saying. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing you say, I think I'm understanding better now, is that you think the boldness with which this, again, very small minority of people who have no influence or power is saying, the boldness with which they are acting, you think reflects a confidence that they have backing, into some kind of institutional backing or revolutionary backing, or that they're really part of a bigger movement when there aren't, and that they should be careful because there is no such thing, and that they are vulnerable.
To attack by fascist maniacs, yes,
okay.
That's correct.
And
all right, great. So cut the last 2 hours and just go with that.
I don't disagree that that's true, but I also think that people know that, and they're willing to take a risk. And to bring this back to Taibbi as we close, as we bring it back to close, many of us are taking risks every day.
Sure.
And we're giving up a lot every day.
Sure.
And I don't want to be so clear. I don't want to die. I didn't want to lose my job. I have bills to pay.
Of course.
I don't want a lot of that to happen. But what I really don't want is to be party to one of the greatest injustices of my life, perhaps the single greatest injustice of our lifetime in Gaza. What I don't want to do is be silent while a murder is being used to justify an expansion of the surveillance state and a stripping away of our First Amendment rights. What I don't want to do is not say a true thing about how Charlie Kirk was a venal racist because I'm afraid I'm going to be put on some list to get fired. Well, I've already been fired. So until the day they start advocating and kicking me off Patreon, which might happen, I feel like it is my obligation to loudly and clearly say what is true. And I think some of the people on the internet feel the same way and are willing to suffer the slings and arrows. And if you're not that person, then listen to Keaton's advice and don't write a check. Don't write a check that your ass can't cash or whatever. Don't let your mouth write a check that your ass can't.
I think it's politically counterproductive as well. I really do.
That part I'm not on board with you about.
All right. Well, that's fine.
Well,
we could agree to disagree on that. But I do think. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think what we can all agree on is I think the space, to a certain extent, functions as a panopticon. I think it encourages a lot of internecine fighting and a lot of missing the point and a lot of hot takes, particularly among people. I think the people who do this professionally, who are honest actors, are in a minority. I mean, particularly the higher up the ladder you go, yes. I think most of them are just lying. I mean, I've seen Alex Jones, for one example. I've seen him on every side of takes on this, depending on where he thinks the wind is blowing. Benny Johnson, I mean, right before this, going to your point, Brianna, the big obsession of the right-wing podcast space for about a week before this was the violence of black men and how we have to
Of course.
start being
Yes.
honest about it. That was the whole thing that they were really trying to drum up right before this happened. They were obsessed with this. Benny did a whole monologue about it. I think part of what Keaton is saying and also what you're saying is we need to be productive. We can't stop having the conversation. I told, I got to be careful. I'm responsible to a partner here. What I say here, as soon as this story came up, I told Keaton, I hate stories like this because you have to tiptoe around so many things. There are so many landmines, and it's if you're going to be honest about what you think about it, you're opening yourself up to these maniacal attacks from deranged people. And at the same time, you don't want to be dishonest. You can't not cover it. You can't just stay out of it. You can't. This is your job to explain what you think about it. I agree that the breastbeating about Charlie Kirk is absurd if you care about some of the groups that were victimized by his rhetoric. I think you can say this is not the way, like it's counterproductive. I wouldn't encourage that kind of action against people like Charlie Kirk, not for moral reasons, for strategic reasons. That's not effective. That's not effective. As you pointed out, as Norm pointed out, which Keaton referenced with the Nat Turner uprising. Hey, man, horrible things are going to happen in a revolution and a rebellion. What do you think? Like, no innocents were killed in the Revolutionary War? Like, things are going to happen in those situations. Keaton is right, and I fully agree with him on this, that there are a lot of people who think there's a movement because they hang out online that doesn't exist in the real world, and might overestimate the potential of this being a revolutionary moment from the left. It is a revolutionary moment for most definitions, but the right has all of the advantages right now. Now, you want to have an honest conversation that incorporates what you're saying about Charlie Kirk, which I think is valid. I don't think you have to tiptoe around that and make this guy a saint.
No, of course not.
But at the same time, and Keaton didn't in his segment about it. He pointed out the kinds of rhetoric that Charlie Kirk
pointed
was
out just
known
about
for.
everything you've
He didn't avoid that. But yes, if the left wants to have a serious conversation that's not all hot takes and for clicks, you want a serious conversation, you got to talk about, all right, well, so for decades, there's essentially been a PSYOP run that has destroyed left leadership, has destroyed left organization, has destroyed class consciousness society-wide. What do we do from here? And sure, I don't think the focus should be people venting on TikTok, but maybe part of the problem is that's too much of where the energy is, and not enough of the energy is in serious efforts at organizing.
Yes.
Like that's what very often passes for a political act.
Right.
And there's not a lot of real world manifestation of it. Not a lot of follow through that's effective or meaningful movement building.
I don't know.
And people,
I just like that's so unfair. That's completely. And I got to say, I think you're not familiar with this audience, and I don't expect you to have listened to every episode of the show. But that's literally all we do on this podcast.
Sure.
Like the focus of this podcast, and why I keep trying to direct the conversation back to stop. There's a part of me that's so
I'm not
frustrated.
low. I wasn't accusing you of that. I wasn't saying
I know, but I got to say this. Sometimes I just got to say this because I feel like I have to voice what I think the audience is feeling. It was likely to be feeling. What the left loves to do is to sit around and say, we won't talk about the problem. We won't. Oh, sorry. Why won't? I keep turning off my camera. Why can't we talk about solutions? I'm like, you are talking right now. Just start talking about solutions. Whereas on this podcast, not every single episode, but I bring people on who are Jane McAlevey and whatever union organizer say, what do you want me to do tomorrow? What is the step tomorrow? I can accept if there's a 5 or 10 or 15 year timeline on this, but what the first step starts today. So what is it? And we have gotten to a point where we have been very clear-eyed about the fact that electoral politics is not the way out, that there is value in putting pressure on the Democratic Party by supporting third-party alternatives and using vote withholding strategically to exert some political pressure while you're building alternatives, and that direct protest is going to be the key forward. And that's part of why we have to be very clear-eyed about what increased carceral penalties are being applied to people who engage in nonviolent protests. And that's all part of what we're up against. I really appreciate your reference to the Powell memo and the fact that it's not just conservatives that are aligned against us and have had this multi-decade plan, but Democrats have decided not to participate in a genuine resistance because they are effectively funded by the same corporate interests that motivated the Powell memo. So that is not to be despairing. But that is to say, the idea that we're up against all of that, and the people who listen to this podcast are largely extremely engaged individuals, many of whom are working class or low income themselves, that are doing what they can. Some of them, the only thing they're going to be able to do to express themselves in this moment, because they've got a lot on their plate, is to frankly tweet, "I hated Charlie Kirk." And I have a big issue, I'm sorry, with sitting here and spending even one breath of my life saying that person shouldn't have done that, because why weren't they building up a revolution? But like, you don't know who these random isolated people all over the internet are. People express themselves on the internet because they are disaffected, because they're disenfranchised, because they have no voice, they have no political voice. They're one person isolated in a world. And so you're right.
Yes,
they don't have any protection. They're not part of a movement. But the best they have is to join a chorus, a small but existing chorus of people who are willing to stand up and say, it is not good that Charlie Kirk was the man that he was. It is not, I don't necessarily support that he was killed, but I'm not going to sit here and allow these hagiographies to be written in the liberal paper of record. And those people tweeting that does do something, because just like the Trump people have become increasingly emboldened, and that has fed into this movement that has given them power into the country. Yes, we cannot allow people to normalize who Charlie Kirk was. And I don't think that there is no value to people speaking up and being critical of him in the moment. And frankly, I think the right understands the value of that as well, which is why they are passing laws as we speak to try to prevent people from doing exactly that.
Yeah, no, I get all that. I get all that. And what I'm saying is, first of all, I think there is an important distinction between saying Charlie Kirk was a racist, I disavow Charlie Kirk, and saying that you're glad he was killed or supporting that action.
There is a difference.
There is a difference,
and both are constitutionally protected.
They are both constitutionally protected, yes. And I'm not for the cancel culture crusade. I'm not against people getting fired or anything like that. But what you said there, I think, is important, that people are isolated and all they have is their phone. All they have is their app. That is a huge fucking problem, that so many people are so isolated that all they have, their only tool of expression is this, and the only people giving them feedback on that expression are in here and not out in the world. That is a massive problem. It's a massive problem.
I mean, it's a broader thing. That's a broader
exactly. So that was kind of what I had to say.
Well, look, I really appreciate both of you joining me here, because I really feel like this is a rich conversation, and it really helped me to sort of verbalize where I am. I mean, I've obviously had a ton of offline conversations with families and friends about Charlie Kirk, but I've been a little reluctant to, not out of fear, and I want to be clear, I'm afraid, but I won't allow myself to, for my behavior to be affected by that. It is what it is. But because, to your point, I forget which of you, Keaton, you were saying, no, it was you, Russell, that there's all this tiptoeing that you have to do around the subject, because it's so easy to be misinterpreted. It's easy to say something out of like pique and anger that doesn't even accord with one's own values. Like, I think all of that is true. But now, a few days out, we're recording this on the Sunday before the episode airs. I felt like this is one of the more rich and purposeful conversations I've been able to have about this issue. And I'm really grateful to both of you for your willingness to sit here for over 2 hours now and have it with me. God bless producer Armand for having to deal with this before tomorrow. If the episode's a little bit late, that is why. And also thank you for helping to make up for what was an unfortunately abbreviated conversation with Zaid Jilani. So really, really, I appreciate both of your voices. I hope our having disagreements doesn't translate into me not like really appreciating the pushback and the sharpening that comes from the pushback that you guys get.
Oh, back at you. Back at you.
Well, no. I mean, now we can slot roasting Brianna into, because we weren't sure what we were going to do on the show tonight.
Yeah, right. And I will just say, for the record, I said exactly what I felt about this in the thing that I just DM'd you, Bree. So feel free to use as much. But I didn't. That was not me picking and choosing what to say. Those are my exact honest thoughts. And you're probably going to hate the first 6 minutes of it, but then you're going to probably like the last 10. That's the way a lot of people reacted to it. So use as much of it as you want. If you think it's any good and you think it would be useful, that's fine. But yeah, no, it's great to talk to you again.
Tell people where they can find that clip and more of you two, your work, the live stream that you're about to hop on right after you hang up.
Yeah, they can find that at bitshoot.com/xv5. You can go to YouTube, search Due Dissidents, YouTube, Rumble, and Spotify, Apple. We're on all the audio podcasts too.
When I say that you guys are like at the really top of my list for streaming and catching up on, when you know what the takes on the current news events are, I really mean it. I really, really enjoy your show. And if you guys aren't already watching Due Dissidents and subscribe to their YouTube channel, you should do exactly that. Thanks for tuning in and supporting. Yeah, I really. It
used to mean a lot coming from Matt Taibbi. Now it means a lot coming from you.
Well, look, thank you very much, Brianna. Thank you.
And I hope there's a day where it means a lot coming from Matt Taibbi again going forward, because the end result of all of this criticism, I don't want it to be like ostracized Matt Taibbi. Right. I would love it if tomorrow he writes an article saying, you know what, you guys, you were right. I was wrong. I'm going back to reporting on all of these issues. And I'd be like, great, wonderful. Lovely to have you back on the team. Awesome. I don't have even one bit of resentment, holding a grudge, nothing. Let's move forward. Truly would love that.
Of course.
Thanks to the subscribers. Thanks for supporting this podcast. Take care of yourselves. And as always, keep the faith. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.